My name is Sandra Kowalski. I was a police officer in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for 29 years. I worked homicide for 14 of those years. I have seen the absolute worst that human beings are capable of doing to one another. And I want you to understand that when I tell you what I am about to tell you, it is not coming from someone who was sheltered from the darkness of this world. I have looked at that darkness directly, professionally, for nearly 3 decades. And in August of 2017, I died from a pulmonary embolism in the parking lot of a Costco on McKnight Road. And what I was shown on the other side rearranged everything I thought I understood about how this universe actually works. I am still putting the pieces back in order. I am not sure they go back the same way. Let me tell you who Sandra Kowalski was before any of this happened. I grew up in the Polish Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh, the eldest daughter of a steelworker father and a mother who cleaned houses 5 days a week and made the best pierogi in Allegheny County on the other 2. We were Catholic the way Pittsburgh is Catholic, thoroughly, habitually, with a reverence for the rituals that did not always extend to deep theological examination. I went to Mass. I said the prayers. I believed in God the way I believed in the weather, as a background fact of existence that I did not spend much time interrogating. I joined the Pittsburgh Police Department at 22, the year Ronald Reagan was finishing his first term, which gives you a sense of how long ago that was. I was one of 4 women in my academy class. I learned quickly that the way to earn respect in that environment was to be tougher, faster, and more composed than anyone expected. I became all 3. I made detective at 31, homicide at 34. I worked under Captain Dennis Morovich, who was the finest investigator I have ever known, and who taught me that the most important tool in any investigation is the willingness to follow the evidence wherever it goes, even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable. I carried that lesson into the rest of my life, or I thought I did. I married late, 41, which raised exactly the eyebrows you would expect in a large Polish Catholic family. His name was Robert Kowalski, no relation despite the shared name, which was a coincidence that entertained our entire precinct for approximately 3 years. Robert managed a car dealership in Monroeville. He was patient and funny and entirely unintimidated by the fact that his wife carried a firearm to work. We did not have children of our own, which was a grief we carried quietly and eventually made our peace with. We had nieces and nephews in abundance. We had each other. We retired within 6 months of each other. Robert in early 2017, me in June of the same year, after 29 years and 4 months of service. I was enjoying retirement approximately as much as any person who has defined themselves entirely through their work enjoys retirement, which is to say I was restless and slightly lost, and filling the hours with projects that did not quite fit the shape of what I was used to doing. Robert was patient about this. Robert was patient about most things. It is a Wednesday in August of 2017. I have been retired for exactly 8 weeks. I am at the Costco on McKnight Road because Robert asked me to pick up coffee. And I decided that while I was there, I would also get paper towels, olive oil, a 48-pack of AA batteries, and whatever else caught my eye, which is how Costco operates and how they have become one of the most successful retailers in American history. I am in the parking lot, pushing a cart that contains approximately $240 worth of items I had not planned to purchase when I arrived. I stop walking. There is a pain in my chest, not sharp, not the Hollywood heart attack chest grab, something more like a heaviness, a tightness, combined with a breathlessness that does not make sense given that I am standing still in a parking lot on a mild August afternoon. I have been having some shortness of breath for about a week. I had attributed it to deconditioning. I had been less active since retiring. I had told myself I would call my doctor next week. Here is my first piece of advice to anyone watching this. Do not tell yourself you will call your doctor next week. The breathlessness intensifies. My left leg, which had been mildly swollen for several days, another thing I had attributed to summer heat, begins to ache with a sudden and specific pain that I now recognize as the clot in my left calf, releasing its smaller components into my bloodstream, where they travel immediately to my lungs and begin very efficiently to shut them down. A massive pulmonary embolism. That is what the doctors will call it later. Multiple bilateral emboli, large. The attending physician at UPMC Presbyterian will tell Robert that he does not entirely understand why I survived, which is a thing doctors say when the data does not match the outcome. I go down next to my cart. The parking lot asphalt is hot through my clothing. I can see the undercarriage of a minivan parked in the adjacent space. A woman nearby makes a sound, a sharp, involuntary sound that people make when they witness something that should not be happening in a Costco parking lot on a Wednesday afternoon. I hear her. I cannot respond to her. The effort of breathing has become the entire project of my existence, and it is a project I am losing. A retired homicide detective, I think distantly. 29 years, parking lot, 8 weeks into retirement. There is a dark comedy to this that I would appreciate more if I were not dying. The light goes strange, not dark, strange. The edges of things become less definite. The minivan, the asphalt, the woman's shoes, which are now close to my face because she has knelt beside me. They all begin to lose their hard borders. The sound of the parking lot, which had been ordinary and full, starts to recede the way sound recedes when you go underwater. Muffled, then distant, then a quality of silence that is not absence of sound, but something more like what exists before sound begins. And then I am somewhere else. I'm going to tell you what I experienced, and I'm going to use the language that came to me during the experience, because that language, imperfect as it is more accurate than anything I could substitute for it after the fact. I was in a space that had no walls, and no floor, and no ceiling, but did not feel infinite in a frightening way. It felt infinite the way love feels infinite, which is to say, it felt like the right size for what it contained. The light was everywhere and was not blinding. That is one of the things that still strikes me when I try to describe it. It was the brightest thing I have ever experienced, and it did not hurt to look at. It was as though my eyes, or whatever I was using in place of eyes, had been built specifically for this light. The peace came first. I want to say that clearly because it was the first thing and it was the most complete thing. It was not the peace of absence, not the peace of having your problems temporarily suspended. It was the peace of resolution, the peace of a question that has been answered so thoroughly that you can no longer remember why it troubled you. Every fear I had carried for 61 years, the fear of inadequacy, the fear of loss, the fear of the darkness I had spent 3 decades documenting in homicide case files. All of it was simply not present, not suppressed, not managed, absent, as if it had never been real to begin with. And then the knowing began. I am going to call them laws because that is what they felt like, and because my background is in law enforcement, and because the word that kept arriving during the experience was exactly that word, laws. Not rules, not suggestions, laws. The kind that do not require enforcement because they simply are, the way gravity simply is. The first thing I was shown, and shown is the right word, because it arrived as direct experience rather than instruction, was that every action in the universe produces a return, not as punishment, not as reward, as physics. The way dropping a stone in still water produces rings that travel outward and eventually return to where they started. What you send out comes back. Every act of cruelty, every act of kindness, every moment of indifference, all of it moving in rings, all of it returning. In my 29 years of homicide work, I had seen this principle operating at the street level in ways I had always attributed to human psychology. What I understood in that space was that it goes much deeper than psychology. It is structural. It is how the universe is built. The second thing I understood was that time as we experience it is a frame, not a fact. The present moment, this moment, right now, is the only place where anything is actually happening. And most human suffering comes from dragging the past into it or pulling the future back into it before either belongs there. I had spent my career in the past, living in crime scenes, in case files, in the weight of things that had already happened. I understood in that space what that had cost me. Not with regret. There was no regret there, only clarity. But with the recognition of a person who has finally read the directions and understood what they were trying to build. The third thing was the hardest to receive and the most important. Every person I had ever encountered in a homicide investigation, victim, perpetrator, witness, family member, every single one of them was known completely, not evaluated, not sorted into categories of worthy and unworthy, known, the way I described earlier, from the inside. And what I understood about the people I had arrested, the people I had processed through a system that I believed in and still believe in, was that their darkness was a wound, not a nature. That something had happened to almost every one of them before they became a file on my desk. That does not change the law I described earlier, What you send out comes back. But it changes how you hold the person. It changes the weight of judgment. I want to be careful here. I am not saying that what those people did was acceptable. I spent 29 years saying precisely the opposite, in courtrooms and in the families of victims and in my own conscience. What I am saying is that in that space, I was shown a level of context so complete that the word judgment lost its meaning, replaced by something that I can only call understanding of a depth I had never previously accessed. There were beings present. I hesitate to describe them because language makes them sound like science fiction, and they were not science fiction. They were more like, I keep returning to this metaphor, they were like colleagues, experienced colleagues who had been there longer than me and knew the territory, and who communicated not with words, but with the direct transfer of understanding that I have heard other NDE survivors describe, and that I can confirm is exactly as immediate and complete as they say. No ambiguity, no subtext, no reading between lines, just meaning, arriving whole. One of them communicated something specific to me. I received it as a full understanding rather than a sentence. But if I had to translate it into words, it would be this. The thing you call justice and the thing the universe calls love are the same thing, viewed from different distances. Get close enough and they become indistinguishable. I have thought about that every day since August of 2017. There was a moment when the space shifted, not dramatically, not with announcement, and I understood that I was being returned. I did not argue. I want to say that I argued because it would make a better story, but I did not. There was a completeness to what had been given to me that made the return feel appropriate, like finishing a meal, like the last page of a book that ends exactly where it should. The parking lot came back in pieces. Sound first, someone saying my name, then sirens, then the specific acoustics of a space with too many hard surfaces and too many people. Then light, not the light of that place, but ordinary overcast Pittsburgh August sky. And I want to tell you that overcast Pittsburgh August sky has never looked so specific and so valuable as it did in that first moment of return. Then wait, the extraordinary, unwelcome, completely necessary wait of a body that has decided to continue. Robert arrived at UPMC Presbyterian 40 minutes after the ambulance. I was conscious by then, barely, tethered to several machines and staffed by a team of people who were using the focused efficiency of medical professionals managing an outcome they had not expected. Robert stood at the foot of my bed and looked at me with an expression I had seen on the faces of family members in hospital waiting rooms for 29 years. And now I was on the other side of it, and I understood it from the inside in a way I never had from the outside. I said, "Robert, I saw something." He said, "I know. I can see it on your face." The physical recovery took 4 months. Blood thinners, follow-up imaging, cardiac monitoring. The hematologist at UPMC told me that the clot burden in my lungs was, in his clinical assessment, incompatible with the outcome I had achieved, which was surviving without significant permanent damage. I found this information interesting rather than alarming. which is itself a data point about what the experience had done to my relationship with the concept of death. The integration was its own kind of work, and I want to be honest that it was not seamless. I had 30 years of professional habit that told me to process what I had seen into a case file and close it. The experience refused to be filed. It kept opening. It kept asking me to revise categories I had spent a lifetime constructing. I went to therapy, practical, direct, cognitive behavioral therapy, with a woman in Mount Lebanon who had worked with first responders for 20 years and who did not flinch when I told her what had happened in the Costco parking lot. I started a journal. I started taking walks without a destination, which sounds small, but for someone who had spent 30 years walking towards specific problems, represented a significant philosophical shift. I talk to other retired officers now through a peer support program I started in 2019 with a former colleague. First responders carry things that do not have official places to be set down. I did not understand before my experience that the weight of what we carry is not inevitable, that it can be examined, that the laws I was shown in that space apply to trauma the same way they apply to everything else. It produces a return, and the return keeps arriving until you turn around and face it. Robert and I are still in Pittsburgh. We are not going anywhere. This city made me, and I have decided that is sufficient reason to stay. The winters are difficult, and the sports teams are a spiritual trial, and I would not trade it. Here is what I need you to understand before I go. The universe is not indifferent. I spent 29 years in the company of evidence that it was, and I was wrong. There is a structure underneath everything, underneath the violence and the grief and the senseless Tuesday afternoons, that is not random and is not cruel and does not look away. Every single thing you have ever done out of love, no matter how small, no matter how unwitnessed, has registered, has mattered, is, in the language of what I was shown, still traveling outward in rings. We are not here by accident. We are not here alone. We are here together in this specific and temporary and astonishing arrangement. And what we do with each other is the whole point. Not what we achieve, not what we accumulate, what we do with each other. Take care of the person next to you. That is the entire law. Everything else is commentary. We are all going to make it home. I have been there, and I am telling you, it is waiting for every single one of us. And it looks like everything you ever hoped it would be. And then it looks like more.